We begin with breaking news from Moscow, where the Kremlin has confirmed that a meeting between Russia's President Putin and President Donald Trump will go ahead in the coming days. Next week has been set as a target date. The venue has been agreed upon and will be announced soon. Earlier, Donald Trump said there's a good chance he will meet with Vladimir Putin to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. His comments followed Wednesday's 3-hour meeting between Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and the Russian president, which both Washington and Moscow described as positive. Witkoff raised the prospect of a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin and Zelensky, but Moscow left it without response. Vladimir Zelensky said Ukraine had repeatedly insisted that a meeting between leaders was needed to find a solution. Our North America correspondent Arunade Mukherjee reports.
A much-anticipated meeting between US President Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And all eyes on whether the handshake and smiles can cement Mr. Trump's long-pending ambitions of ending the war in Ukraine, with a strong possibility now of the next interaction being between the US president and leaders of the two countries at war.
There's a very good chance that we could be ending the round, ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov too said the talks were useful and constructive. And on the other side, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said he had spoken to President Trump about Mr. Witkoff's visit, with European leaders also on the call. The optics indicating a renewed push to end the war. But in the past, 3 rounds of talks between Ukraine and Russia have failed to bring the war closer to an end. 3.5 years since Moscow's full invasion. Even now, both the Kremlin and the White House haven't spelt out what these good and constructive talks entailed. All the more reason President Trump remains optimistic, but also cautious.
We've been working on this a long time. There are thousands of young people dying, mostly soldiers, but also, missiles being hit into Kiev and other places.
Mr. Trump has tried to portray himself as the global leader who can get peace deals done around the world. But so far, his inability to do so in the case of Ukraine and Russia, a war he had claimed he would stop in a day, has left him increasingly frustrated. Arunade Mukherjee, BBC News, Washington.
Well, with me is Vitaly Shevchenko, Russian editor at BBC Monitoring. So the signs all look like this meeting is going to go ahead very soon. Then how significant will that be for President Trump to sit down with President Putin?
Well, it's significant in the sense that they haven't sat down and discussed this full-scale invasion before. But we have to remember that this is what Vladimir Putin really wants. Without making any concessions or promises, he has secured a meeting with Donald Trump, apparently. That would make him look like he's equal to the world's movers and shakers. He is back on the global political arena. And when the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said that now, after the talks held by Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's envoy, and Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin yesterday, now Washington has a better understanding of the conditions under which Russia might be prepared to end this war. I wonder if these conditions to which he's referring are any different from what Russia presented back on the 2nd of June during talks with Ukraine in Istanbul. Because just last Friday, Vladimir Putin said, no, we're still sticking to those conditions. And those conditions, they essentially amount to a demand for surrender. Russia wants the whole 5 regions in Ukraine's southeast that it claims as its own, including areas that it doesn't currently control, and things like reducing the size of the Ukrainian army and so on and so forth. Clearly that is not acceptable to Ukraine. Is this something that Washington believes acceptable? That's the huge question now.
It did seem for a long time, didn't it, that the two sides were still very far apart. Is anything different now? We know that Donald Trump has threatened tougher sanctions on Russia. He had set that deadline of Friday this week. Do you think he's ever going to follow through on that in reality? Does Russia believe he's serious about that?
Well, it's also a huge question, and a lot of people, both in Ukraine and in Russia, where the stock market has been rising following the latest from Washington, they didn't think that Donald Trump is going to get tough on Russia suddenly and start imposing sanctions on Russia, its trading partners, sanctions that would really hurt. In fact, Donald Trump sounding excited and optimistic after talks with Vladimir Putin is nothing new. Time and again, this happened, and it was followed by devastating Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilians, after which Donald Trump himself said that he had a feeling that Vladimir Putin was tapping him along, to use Donald Trump's phrase. Is this going to be different? We don't really know. It's too early to say. Last night was relatively quiet in Ukraine. No major Russian attacks. If this quiet is going to last, we don't really know.
All right, Vitaly, thank you so much for joining us. We'll watch the developments in the days ahead.